The following episode is a spoiler review of the School for Good and Evil movie, and also includes spoilers for the book it is based on. Additionally, there are mentions of the Harry Potter series. We at Binging Barbie believe that trans rights are human rights and do not condone those who disagree. Ladies and gentlemen, Barbies and Kens, Kellys of all ages, and everyone else, welcome to Binging Barbie, a Barbie movie podcast. I'm your host, Jay, and with me I have my wonderful co-host. She's not my friend, she's my nemesis. You've met her before on this podcast, Sara.
Only one of us can survive, Jacob.
For those of you just joining us, we are usually a podcast about Barbie movies. We usually watch one of the straight-to-DVD animated Barbie movies and rate how it stacks up to the other ones. But this week is Halloween, and we have a bit of a special podcast planned. We are talking about the recent Netflix movie, The School for Good and Evil.
Ooh.
Yeah, this is, it's based on the book of the same title, that is The School for Good and Evil, that came out in 2013 and was written by Soman Chainani. He's an Indian-American author, and yeah, it tells the story of this titular school for good and evil, where all fairy tales originate. The movie was released on October 19, so just a little bit ago, and it was directed by Paul Feig, who is most known for his comedy work. He directed Bridesmaids, Spy, and the 2016 Ghostbusters remake. The movie itself was written by Feig and David McGee. McGee is known for literary adaptations such as Finding Neverland, Life of Pi, and Mary Poppins Returns, with cinematography by John Schwartzman, who worked on a couple other Feig movies, A Simple Favor and Last Christmas, and he also did a bunch of CGI blockbusters such as The Amazing Spider-Man, Jurassic World, and Dracula Untold. Production design is by Andy Nicholson, with costume design by Renee Erlich-Kalfus. Nicholson is known for his work on sci-fi films such as Gravity and Divergent, whereas Erlich-Kalfus is known for her work on period films such as Hidden Figures and Chocolat. And yeah, the music is by Theodore Shapiro, though they use quite a few covers of popular songs by artists. I noticed one Billie Eilish song and one Britney Spears song. Any thoughts before we dive in?
It was very different from the book. Like most movie adaptations, cut out a lot of things, so.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a lot to talk about adaptation-wise. So, you actually read the book a while ago.
Yeah.
Did you read it right when it came out, or?
Yeah, I read it right when it came out, and then when the sequel came out, I read it again, and then when the third book came out, I read it again, and then when the fourth, fifth, and sixth books came out, I kind of waited for all of those to come out before I read the first book again, but I have read all the books and the prequel, so.
Okay. So you're quite the expert on these books. I just read the first book actually in the last 24 hours since watching the movie, or before watching the movie. I read the book, sort of binged the audio book. It took me 7 hours, but yeah, it's a very good book. And I don't know if the movie quite stacks up, but we're gonna get into that. First, let's talk a bit about the production. So the film rights to the book were acquired shortly after it was published. This has been in the works for a very long time, since 2013 basically. Initially, Universal was set to produce the film, but plans kind of fell through, and the movie spent quite a while in what is known as development hell, which just means the movie keeps they get new writers on, they get new directors on, but it's just not making any progress. And I think part of that is it was released sort of at the tail end of this YA sci-fi fantasy movie craze. You know, the Twilight movies were released 2008 to 2011. You had the Hunger Games movies, you had the Divergent movies. But by 2014, 2015, those were all starting to sort of diminish at the box office. So this was maybe not a priority for Universal.
Also, the book is made for younger audiences than Hunger
Yeah.
Games and Divergent, and so, you know, making a PG-13 movie out of a book made for younger kids is not.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of... I mean, fantasy movies as well at the time were kind of going out of fashion and kind of remain out of fashion to this day. We sort of saw fantasy move mainly into video games and TV with a lot of things happening. But in 2017, Netflix purchased the rights to the book, and Paul Feig was brought on in 2020, and this was sort of 2020, everyone was stuck home, so that gave studios a lot of time to just develop projects, and this is one that came about in that time. Production finally started in April of 2021, and it wrapped in July of 2021. Since then, they've been working on the visual effects and post-production. This is a very CGI-heavy movie. Paul Feig is known for his dislike of green screens, so a lot of the sets were actually constructed, but there's still a lot of visual effects going on. Some entirely digital shots, a lot of sort of composite shots. You can definitely tell that they put a lot of work into the VFX here.
Mm-hmm. And it really does feel like it fits in the fantasy world. There wasn't really a big scene where you felt like, oh, that looks out of place in this fantasy world. Or
yeah, the design of it works. I think the execution is maybe a little bit lacking.
Yeah. But nothing felt out of place. None of the magic, none of the spells, anything like that. So,
yeah. Yeah, the basic plot here is that it's similar to the original book, but with some major changes. One way to think of it is it's basically Mean Girls set in a fantasy school, where it's sort of questioning these dynamics of who's right, who's wrong, who's good, who's evil, and maybe flipping those ideas on their head. And it's playing with familiar tropes in new ways, but it takes place in this fantasy world where all fairy tales are real. They are written out by this magic pen called the Storian, which is in the School for Good and Evil. And the movie starts 200 years in the past, where the brothers Rian and Raphael, they were the safekeepers of the Storian. One was good, one was evil. But Raphael, the evil one, became sort of jealous and attacked Rian, the good one. And one of them prevailed. And since then, good has always prevailed in the stories. Mm-hmm. So it's been 200 years of this winning streak for the School for Good.
Yeah, I want to say along those lines, the book and the movie have different reasons as to why good always wins. So in the movie, they say that Raphael let good win so that they could become arrogant. And then evil could take over the arrogant good. But in the book, they talk about that because Raphael killed good, good is trying to get back at Raphael for killing good by only letting good win.
We're introduced to Sophie and Agatha, who are two girls who live in the village of Gavelston. And Sophie is sort of the beautiful princessy one. She puts a lot of thought into her appearance and her behavior, and is sort of, in the book, they know about the School for Good and Evil, and she wants to get in the School for Good. Whereas in the movie, she's just kind of very princessy naturally, and doesn't find out about the School for Good and Evil for a little bit. But Agatha is pretty much the exact opposite. She isn't as pretty in the book. This is more obvious in the movie. Obviously, they hired two actresses who, they're good looking. These are Hollywood actors who they didn't hire anyone who would feel out of place in any Hollywood movie. But That's sort of her character trait. She puts less thought into her appearance, and she lives in a graveyard with her mother, who is a wannabe witch and who wants her daughter to be a witch. So Agatha is kind of shunned by the people of the village. And again, in the book, when the village knows about this school for good and evil, she's sort of been branded as she's gonna be one of the people taken for the school for evil. But again, in the movie, they don't know about the school for good and evil, so that doesn't factor in. But yeah, they obviously get taken away. They get spirited away in the night to the school for good and evil. And in a twist, Agatha, the more witchy of the two, is dropped in the school for good. And Sophie, the more princessy of the two, is dropped in the school for evil. And they kind of believe there has been a mistake, Agatha's looking at all of the school for good, the Evers, who are these beautiful princesses and handsome princes, and they wear big pink dresses and frolic in the woods and take classes about smiling and kindness. And at the school for evil, it's all sort of very goth aesthetics. Everyone wears dark black and dark colors, and they take classes on how to become uglier and how to train your henchmen, and sort of very stereotypical ideas of fairy tale good and evil. So they kind of try to figure out what's this mistake. How did they get put in these schools? And Agatha wants to go back home, but Sophie kind of secretly hopes that she can trade places with Agatha, because the school for good represents everything she wants. There's this handsome prince that she has a crush on, and this sort of beautiful, opulent lifestyle that she wants. But they manage to get to the schoolmaster. He's the one in charge. He is the brother who won this ancient battle long ago and now protects the story. And so they get to his tower, and it turns out that the historian is already writing their story. And the only way for them to get back home is for Sophie to have true love's kiss. Because true love is defined as this thing that evil can never have and good can never live without. So that becomes the plot for a little bit. Sophie has a crush on the popular boy Tedros, and she and Agatha sort of scheme together to get Tedros to kiss her. And things are initially going well, but then things fall out during this trial by tale where Tedros ends up in danger, and it's sort of...
It's Agatha who saves
him
Agatha, instead of Sophie.
Yeah. Because Sophie has this idea of, the prince saves the princess, and then Agatha steps in and intervenes, and that kind of reveals to Tedros that Sophie isn't as good as she claims to be, and as a result of that rejection, Sophie actually sort of embraces this evil inside her and plots her revenge. And on the night of the snowball, which is this big ball that the Evers, the good school, have, she freezes all the teachers, and then, believing they are in danger, Tedros unites all of the Evers to attack the Nevers. And since evil attacks and good defends in this world, that flips everyone's place in this balance of power, and the good become evil and the evil become good. And in this chaos, Sophie makes her way to the schoolmaster's tower, where the schoolmaster reveals himself to actually be Raphael, the evil one who killed his brother 200 years ago, and has sort of been hiding his intentions all along. And he and Sophie kiss, giving him the power to destroy the world and remake it as sort of this evil, I believe they call it Neverwhere?
Never After.
Never After in the movie. In the book, there's Nevermore.
Yeah, because it's Happily Ever After and Nevermore.
Yeah, they change it for the movie where it's... In the book, Nevermore is the place that the villains go once they've won, and it's a world where they can rule entirely by themselves. Whereas Happily Ever After is obviously the happy ending of a lot of fairy tales. Here, they don't mention either one, and instead you get Nevermore, which is...
Never After.
Never After, which is the evil ruling the entire world. But Agatha shows up before anything can happen, and Raphael tries to kill her, but Sophie steps in the way, and the act of self-sacrifice robs Raphael of his powers, and Sophie and Agatha are able to defeat him together. Sophie dies, but Agatha brings her back with true love's kiss, and because they had this kiss, now the two of them can leave the school and return to Gaveston, and they leave the School for Good and Evil behind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a very complicated plot.
Yeah, it really is.
It's weaving in a lot of tropes throughout it, a lot of tropes of fairy tales, a lot of tropes of fantasy in general, a lot of like school tropes.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's and we didn't even mention a lot of the stuff that happened, especially the book. A lot of it is devoted to sort of the school drama. In the movie, it's condensed down, and I think the movie loses a lot of the world building and character development of the book.
Mm-hmm. It really does, and there's a lot of things that, without going into any spoilers for the next books, but there's a lot of things that I don't know how they're gonna bring them back in the next book, and how that's gonna change things, because they completely got rid of some of the things. One of them was Raphael pretending to be the good schoolmaster. It kind of takes away they never knew who won until the end of the first book. They never knew if it was the good schoolmaster that won or the evil schoolmaster that won. But him pretending to be the good schoolmaster kind of takes away all that whole thing that goes into the second book, where they're debating whether it was actually the good who won or the evil schoolmaster who won, because only Sophie really knows. So
yeah, it's even for this movie, it takes away that sort of element of mystery. And yeah, there's a ton of changes like that, where a lot of important themes and characters are like minimized or completely missing. Most of the side characters are reduced to a few tropes. So you have like Hester and Dot, who are two of the Nevers, and initially they're very antagonistic towards Sophie, but eventually they kind of become her lackeys. And in the book, they're interesting characters who we see them develop over time, and they're a big part of the story of how evil isn't always evil and good isn't always good. I think especially Dot, who gets sort of bullied out of her room and like ends up living in a bathroom because no one wants to be near her. You feel bad for her, even though she's in the school for evil. She's this very kind person.
Yeah, and the same thing. The character I'm really sad they got rid of is Professor Sater, and because he plays such a big role in helping Agatha, just with his books, and they get rid of him, and he plays a huge role in the next books, especially. And so when I first saw the trailer, I actually thought the good schoolmaster was Professor Sater. And I was like, oh wow, they cast him really well. They have such a great actor for him. And then, nope, it's not Professor Sater. They got rid of him. So I was just kind of disappointed about that, because I went into the movie, saw the first scene of him, and was really excited. And then he ends up not being who I thought he was. And it just kind of like, I don't know, I was very disappointed in that.
Yeah, I mean, all of the teachers here have expanded roles, but they've condensed the various teachers into just a few. And yeah, that follows with a thing where the whole school aspect of it is very de-emphasized, and they focus more on the plot, where you don't have a lot of the school drama, a lot of the classroom stuff, and that ends up the world building is a little bit weaker because of it.
Yeah, we really don't get to know the teachers and the students like we do in the book, because you really get to see, especially like through what you said with Hester and Dot, you get to see kind of how they would act a bit good, and you get to see how some of the good students seem a bit evil at times as well in the book, and you wonder, like, oh, wow, like, are they really in the right schools? And so...
Yeah, I think Beatrix in the book is sort of this vain and stuck-up princess who's treats people very poorly, but because she's on the good side, she gets away with it. And yeah, even things like the grading system, it gets brought up, but it doesn't really play into the plot past a certain point. We see in the book, the way the grading system works is if you get 3 failing grades in a row, then something happens to you. And you don't find out until later what happens to you, but what it is you are transformed into either a fairy or a wolf. And the fairies are kind of the servants for the school for good, and the wolves are the servants for the school for evil. But the thing is, if you failed 3 times in the school for evil, then you become a fairy. So you're now forced to work for the school for good eternally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they also bring up the grading system more in the book. In the book, it's about, you get ranked as a class, so whoever's the best gets the top score, and whoever's the worst gets the fail. And so there's really that competition aspect in the classes. And I thought it was really interesting in the book. Sophie is always passing all of her classes. She's always top in all of her classes. And Agatha is always pretty much at the bottom.
It's the reverse, actually. Agatha's the one who is the more studious, and then Sophie is the one who is failing all of her classes until Agatha transforms herself into a cockroach and sort of sits on Sophie's shoulder.
At the beginning, though, Sophie's passing some of her classes. Like the snakeskin one.
Yeah. I think it's kind of like because both Sophie and Agatha pass enough classes to not get turned into wolves or fairies. Mm-hmm. In the movie, we actually see someone fail 3 times. Gregor, I believe is his name. Mm-hmm. And instead of being turned into a wolf or a fairy, he's turned into what are they called? The
synths?
A synth.
Yeah.
Synth?
Well, so the failing thing in the book is whoever's the lowest in the grade, like whoever's the lowest in the class, gets turned into like an animal friend or like a henchman.
Yeah.
And then if you like fail, I don't think it's 3 times. I think
it is 3 times in the book.
But you really need to fail it badly.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, it makes more sense in the book, I think, the grading system.
Well, and the movie has the same grading system, but it doesn't factor in besides that scene. Mm-hmm. Where Gregor fails 3 times. Because in the book, it's very important as well to things like the Trial by Tale and the Circus of Talents, where the Trial by Tale in the movie is very different and the Circus of Talents doesn't even show up. Mm-hmm. So you're missing that sort of... Again, the school drama is missing that conflict between people.
Yeah, I was also mad that they got rid of the Blue Forest groups, where you got to see in the book the Nevers and Evers interact with each other and learn together, and you never got to see that in the movie. So, because that was very interesting to see. And that's when we're first introduced to the rules of good and evil, and they really play out later. Whereas when they introduce the rules of good and evil in the book, in the movie, it's right when they need them to. They just kind of say, oh yeah, now all of a sudden we have this rule where evil attacks and good defends, and we haven't mentioned it ever at all until it's convenient.
They mention it once before, but it's in a scene where it isn't even the point of the scene. Mm-hmm. So it's just an odd way to introduce these ideas. And yeah, as a whole, the world building is just disappointing because of it, where even things that are important to the movie, like the snowball, that's never explained. Where in the book, it's this sort of symbol of status among the good, where the Evers put on this annual ball where they just celebrate being good. And the Nevers aren't invited at all, never allowed. But Sophie, as sort of this Never who wants to be an Ever, convinces them to put on their own ball. And it's sort of this act of defiance that kind of makes you more sympathetic to the Nevers, that like, oh yeah, they also want to have fun.
And also, with the Circus of Talents, you see how, like, the Nevers are fighting over who gets to be in the circus and saying, oh, if we put this person in and we train super hard for this person, we can actually win. Whereas the Evers are like, oh, I'm just going to go up there and sing and hopefully I win. And you see the Nevers putting in way more work. Yeah. And then they end up losing and you feel kind of bad for the Nevers because you saw all the work they tried to put into that.
Well, the Nevers win in the book.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, the Circus of Talents is gone in the movie, so you don't have a lot of that. Again, like you said, the interaction between the Nevers and the Evers, you really don't get it much in the movie, outside of what in the end you get a little bit more of it, but it isn't as powerful because you haven't seen what before. And then one of the things that happens in the book is this flip-flopping between good and evil that happens in the end, where the Evers attack and the Nevers defend, and so now the Evers sort of get ugly and evil, and the Nevers turn beautiful, and like...
Yeah.
And eventually what happens with that battle is, like, they stop being able to distinguish between each other, so now they're attacking their own sides as well. And it builds into this thesis of the book, which in the book the idea is sort of the thing that Agatha says to Sophie, you're not evil, you're human.
Yeah, and I mean, I really like the idea in the book of where they talk about, they have in the Blue Forest, they have these exercises where they get turned into, like, I don't remember if it was a gnome or something. They get turned into, I think, pumpkins at one point. Yeah. And you have to be able to look at the pumpkins and be able to say, oh, this one's good and this one's evil. And a lot of the times people are failing at that in the book, you notice? Yeah. And it just, like, it brings up the point of, like, can you really tell the difference between good and evil just by certain little things like that? So...
Yeah, and that's the thesis of the book is, like, none of these characters are fully good or fully evil. They're all human. And the movie has that. But because none of the side characters are really all that developed, it isn't as powerful. Instead, we focus more on Sophie, which Sophie and Agatha's story has that. That's the main theme of it, where at first you're like... And in the book... we are inside Sophie's head, so we see kind of from the very beginning how vain and selfish she is. And then Agatha, we see her kindness as well. So it isn't a huge surprise when they're dropped in the opposite schools, but it is still like, once you see what these schools are and how, Sophie does have a lot in common with the selfish and vain girls from the School for Good, and Agatha has more in common with the loyal and nice people from the School for Evil. And it's this idea of, okay, there's this false divide between these two groups of people who really aren't all that different.
I really liked in the movie when the Dean of Good comes up to Agatha when she's like, I'm in the wrong school, and she says, you're the truest princess I've seen in the School for Good in such a long time, and really bringing that, like, she's like, these other princesses, they look pretty, but they don't, but they act very selfishly. And you, even though you don't look very pretty, you're not acting selfishly, and you have sympathy, and that's what makes you the princess, not looking pretty and acting pretty and all of that stuff.
Yeah, that's the wish fish scene, which I think they do a pretty good job of adapting, except for maybe a little bit at the end. But, this is this scene where the wish fish are introduced, and they're like these fish that will show you your heart's truest desire. And all of the princesses, they see the faces of whoever they have a crush on. Mm-hmm. And then Agatha goes up and, like, in the book it's subconscious, in the movie she's made the connection already, but she realizes, oh, these fish are former students that have been turned into fish. So she, like, frees them and turns them human again. Mm-hmm. And the fish, who is now a girl, actually says, like, in so many years, everyone's wished for what they want. You're the first person to wish for what I want.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's immediately followed by sort of this upheaval that happens where, like, now everything's in chaos. And in the book, all of the animals of the forest kind of come around and, like, they want Sophie or Agatha to turn them back into people. And they end up stampeding through the entire school for good and start a fire. And then she comes across this gargoyle and she heals him. But just at the last minute, Ted Rose shows up and kills the gargoyle. In this one, that's changed to Gregor, who's been turned into this giant skeleton bird. And Agatha makes the connection and is like trying to save him. And Ted Rose attacks and kills it. And
that brings up the point of, like, the evil attacks and good defends.
Yeah.
Right? And we get to see really the difference where Agatha, why she's in the school for good, because she wanted to help this big scary monster that all the princes and all the princesses just wanted to attack and run away from.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that really shows how Agatha was meant for the school for good, whereas these other people maybe not necessarily were.
Yeah, and what works about the movie, what I like about the movie, is that they have the Gregor character early on who you see, and you feel for him, because he's not very, like, he fails 3 times in a row, and you get why he fails 3 times in a row. He's not the bravest or the strongest, and he's struggling a lot, so it feels very, he doesn't even want to be there. He wants to run a grocery store. And so when he gets turned into this giant bird, you feel bad for him because it's like, well, he didn't even want to be there in the first place. And then when Agatha tries to save him and he gets killed, it feels so much more evil. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the changes that I liked here.
Yeah, one of the changes I didn't really like was the groom room and doom room scenes. So I think we should start with the groom room scene. They don't really have it, and I really like it in the book because she goes into the groom room.
This is Agatha.
Yeah, Agatha goes into the groom room, and she gets knocked out or something, and she wakes up believing that she's been turned into this beautiful princess, and so she walks around with confidence and a smile, and then she looks in a mirror, and nothing has changed. But she realized, like, oh, I don't have to change anything for me to still be beautiful. You know, I don't have to have the blonde hair and everything. Yeah. And that really, they don't do that in the movie. And that just really shows, like, that the beauty was inside. And I just needed to learn that lesson. And then we have the doom room scene, which I think they did a good job in the movie. They just left out the important part of Sophie gets her hair cut off. And then she tries to kill the person who did it.
Well, she does.
She does, yeah.
She knocks him into the lake and he drowns.
So, like, you know, we have that scene where Hester tries to cut off her hair and she attacks. But I feel like the whole doom room scene wasn't about her hair getting cut off. It was about her killing the person who did it.
Yeah.
So it really just, you know, it looked like it had the same effect in the movie. But we needed that. She kills someone over something like that. It just didn't seem the same, because I was kind of expecting her to attack Lady Lesso after that, and she didn't, so. Yeah,
Sophie in general has changed a bit from in the book, and a lot of that has to do with Raphael and this blood magic subplot, where in the book, Sophie's evil is very organic, where the first thing we know about her pretty much is that she's selfish and she's vain. And then once she gets to the actual school, she starts to become even more vain and even more selfish. And when she makes this turn to evil, it makes a lot of sense. Where in the movie, they introduce Raphael, who's the evil brother from 200 years ago, as this sort of corrupting influence who shows up in her mirror, sort of very Phantom of the Opera type idea. and gives her this blood magic, and it makes it so that she has less agency in her own evil. Mm-hmm. Which, since the story of the book, or the thesis of the book, is this idea of everyone has good and evil inside them, no one is one or the other, having this corrupting influence come in just kind of undercuts that theme.
Yeah,
and it makes her redemption less powerful, because it isn't about her being like, I don't want to be evil, and choosing the right thing. It is her coming out from this control of this other corrupting force.
Yeah, I also didn't really like how in the book they go over all these things she's trying to do to hide her ugliness as she's turning into a witch.
Yeah.
And they don't really do that in the movie. She just kind of accepts it. And I didn't really like that because it kind of, in the book when she's trying to hide it, it kind of shows that she's trying to hold on to this. Right? I still want to be beautiful Sophie. Yeah. Whereas in the movie it's like she kind of gets rid of that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think part of that is that since the book came out, and even when the book came out, but ideas of sort of beauty versus ugliness have changed a lot, where things have changed around sort of these dynamics. And in the movie, they don't really commit to making the people who are ugly in the book ugly in the movie. Mm-hmm. To the extent that, with the exception of Sophie having this sort of major transformation, most of the characters, they're switch from ugly to beautiful or beautiful to ugly throughout the book. You barely even notice it. Whereas in the book, it's, these very noticeable things of like warts on their faces, or Sophie getting all of these wrinkles. And in the movie, they have it for Sophie, but they don't have it quite as much. Tedros gets a few scars. Mm-hmm. It's not nearly as extreme, and it's unfortunate because fairy tales use beauty and ugly in this very specific way where it reveals who the person actually is. So it's why there's a whole lot of different things and the way they do in fairy tales, where the evil, beautiful queen is revealed to really be an ugly old woman, or the good prince the beast is transformed into a good prince. And it's all about revealing what's inside. And the School for Good and Evil book uses that very intentionally, where it's there's a sort of a fluidity between ugliness and beauty that all of the characters have, where, something as simple as sort of attacking rather than defending, well, that changes someone's entire appearance. Or something as simple as learning to be a little bit more self-confident, that changes someone's entire appearance. And yeah, in the movie, they don't make that distinction quite as clear.
Yeah.
Like, even when they're talking about, oh, you look so ugly. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, no, there's a scene where Sophie, early on, where it's after Sophie gets her hair cut off, and it's like, oh, you look so ugly. And it's like, no, she doesn't.
Yeah. Well, also, like, we notice that I think they did this in the book with the 2 groom rooms, where they showed that the Nevers get 1 room, basically, to make them more evil and ugly. And then, but the Evers, the girl groom room is all about makeup and dresses and baths and making yourself look pretty, whereas the guys' groom room is all about fighting and being strong. And so even just bringing that dynamic into, like, what's the difference between the guy's role and the girl's role in the fairy tale. And we see that with Sophie in the Trial by Tale, where she doesn't want to help Tedros because she's like, well, he's the prince, he should save me. And then at the end there, too, when they reverse the roles and Agatha and Sophie defeat the schoolmaster and not Tedros, and kind of just that reverse of roles and showing that the prince is supposed to save the princess, but, then reversing upon that, so.
Yeah. And that's, again, the book does a lot to subvert these tropes. In the movie, adapts it, but it also doesn't do as good a job showing how significant that is because it doesn't have the world building to back it up. Now, there are some changes I do like. I think Agatha and Sophie's friendship at the beginning works really well here. Where in the book, the first thing we hear about Agatha is that, oh, Sophie just started being friends with her as like a good deed to get her in the school for good. Mm-hmm. In the movie, no one mentions it. It isn't a thing. So that means that their friendship feels a lot more genuine from the get-go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I can kind of see why you could go with both of them.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, they both work very well. And so, yeah, I also, with the movie, I think it really helped visualize the two schools, just how impressive they were. When I was reading the book, I know they got things wrong about them, but I could never really think of like, oh, that's what it would look like. And I think they did a good job with making the characters look like they fit in the world. And just like, I look at that and I'm like, oh yeah, they did a good job with the costumes and the set design and all that. Even if it doesn't necessarily fit the book 100%, it's still like, it very much feels like a school for good and evil. And it doesn't seem like they tried to... It's not like a stretch that it's a school for good and evil.
Yeah, it looks very impressive. I think the CGI is hit or miss, but the actual sets and the costumes look very well realized.
Yeah, with like the big gowns and skirts for the Evers and, and then the Nevers all in black and I think it was very well done.
Yeah. I think thinking about this and watching this movie made me think about the first Harry Potter movie. Now, obviously, the books are written by someone who has since been revealed to be not the greatest person, but what works about those movies specifically is that, or the best of those movies, they are movies about school first. And the fantasy and the mystery elements are kind of secondary to the story of this big school and the wonder as the characters enter and all of these beautiful practical sets that they actually built in these costumes. And it feels very lived in. Whereas here, this movie, the things that they remove from the book are all have to do with the school. And you don't have as much time spent on like entering a hall and sort of wondering out how grand and marvelous it is.
I would say with that, a big thing in the book is the uniforms and how Sophie and Agatha each get their uniform and they change it, and how the other people usually, it says the Nevers all change their uniform, but the Evers all wear their uniforms the way they're supposed to be worn. And I feel like they could have added a more uniform element that would have made it feel more like a school. And I also noticed that the opening scene when they first get introduced to the school, and it's the opening ceremony or whatever, they have bigger gowns and dresses than in the snowball. And it seems like, wouldn't you want to have nicer gowns and dresses for going to the snowball? It makes sense for Agatha not to have a bigger gown at the snowball because she's kind of like, I don't like gowns anyway.
Yeah.
And she was kind of forced into the gown at the beginning. But I feel like for the other girls, it would have made more sense to have them in more uniform, kind of. And, they don't all have to look the same. And then really just make the snowball gowns more impressive than the opening entrance ones. Because, it didn't make sense.
Yeah, the costume design itself is very good, but the story told by the costumes... For Agatha and for Sophie, the story told by the costumes is very good. Mm-hmm. Where both of them, even though they don't have the uniforms, Sophie is initially sort of wearing these big poofy dresses that she really feels out of place in, and Sophie is wearing essentially a black sack. Mm-hmm. And then over the course of the movie, Agatha's wardrobe becomes sort of more reserved and more closed and more comfortable to who she is, and Sophie sort of gets a little bit looser and a little bit more revealing, and that's more who she is. But yeah, the side characters, you don't get as much character from their wardrobe as you do from the protagonists, which is obviously a time constraint, but that's maybe why you design uniforms where every character wears the same thing, so you can put more time into the little embellishments rather than having to design a new costume for each character.
I think the costumes for the two deans were done really well, though. But I feel like Lady Lesso, or the Dean of Evil's costume, she seems very much like Sophie a bit in that she would wear big floofy dresses.
Yeah.
And they kind of took that away from her in the movie. And I kind of felt like the Dean of Evil was a lot more connected to Sophie in the book just because she seemed kind of like Sophie, and you could kind of see Sophie growing up to be like the Dean of Evil, where she's evil, but she still has this, I want to be pretty, I want to look beautiful.
Yeah.
And so then, she brings up the beauty is power even, and I feel like they could have done more with Lady Lesso with that.
Now, one thing I wanted to talk about a bit was the performances. So, I have the cast list here. First up, we have Sophia Wiley, who's playing Agatha. I thought she was great in the role. Kind of perfectly captures that sort of introversion and outcast nature that Agatha has.
I think she did an amazing job. And just the character development, she did a really good job at, right, because you're watching the beginning of the movie, her at the beginning of the movie and her at the end of the movie, and you can really see that change in confidence and that change in character. And so she did a really good job capturing where her character would be in each scene, in each moment.
Yeah, and beside her we have Sophia Ann Caruso, who is playing Sophie. Again, really good job. I think she's really great at the scenes where she needs to be either selfish or annoying. She's good at like the sort of high-pitched whining. She's also good at sort of these evil scenes where she has to be in this very heavy prosthetic makeup.
I really liked the height difference where Sophie has to look up on everybody, and that kind of shows her character where she wants to be in charge, but she has to look up on almost all the other characters in the movie. And, I never thought of it like that in the book, but now seeing it in the movie, I'm like, oh yeah, that would make sense. She's yelling at Lady Lesso or whining, and she's looking up, or she's whining at Agatha, and she has to look up, and that just brought a different depth to the character that, you probably wouldn't have gotten with a taller actress, so.
Yeah. I think the casting for both protagonists is absolutely phenomenal, and they have really good chemistry together as well, which sells their friendship, which you really need because they spend a lot of the movie apart. So the scenes with them together really work. Next up we have Kerry Washington. She plays the Dean of Good, Professor Dovey. And I don't know, she's a phenomenal actress who's been in a lot of things, but I don't know if she was quite the right fit for this role, or maybe it's just the choices she's making. She's playing it very much like a traditional Disney princess. In the book, she's supposed to be the godmother of Cinderella. Yeah.
And so I kind of expected her to act more like the caretaker, like the godmother, than the princess.
Yeah, I think she could have been a bit more matronly and a bit less princessy. I did read up sort of in the Wikipedia summary of this movie that she was making a very intentional choice. She was imitating actual teachers that she had in real life. But I do kind of feel like she was maybe a bit too princessy and not as you said, she's supposed to be the fairy godmother, and they take that away from her character here. But the way she's performing, she would have been a better fit for a different teacher, Professor Emma Anemone.
Yeah.
Who, in the book, even here, she's the one who teaches the class about smiling, being very princessy. And in this movie, they give her more to do, or more depth than that, because she's played by Michelle Yeoh, who, legendary actress, completely wasted in this movie.
Yeah.
Like, she has two scenes. She's probably getting an Oscar nomination this year for Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, alongside Cate Blanchett, who's in Tar, who's also in this movie. But Michelle Yeoh especially felt very underutilized, and I almost wonder what she could have brought to the role of Professor Dovey, because she's more of that sort of motherly, protective presence.
I kind of wonder, because the character she's playing does have huge roles in the next books, so I wonder if they kind of cast her hoping for a sequel and hoping that she could play a huge role in the sequels and have a great actress in that position for the sequels. And I don't know if that's what they were intending, but I can see how if they make sequels and they keep it kind of the same as the book, she could be an amazing actress in the sequels.
That makes sense. I haven't read the sequel, so I didn't realize that, but yeah, because here she feels wasted in terms of she has very little screen time, very little character development, very little to do. She isn't bad in the movie. I think she gives a good performance, but very much fades into the background. We also have Lawrence Fishburne, who plays the schoolmaster, and then the younger version of this same character is played by Kit Young, who plays both the good Rian and the evil Raphael. Kit Young shows up as Raphael throughout the movie in the mirror talking to Sophie. He's most well known for his role in Shadow and Bone, the Netflix series. And I think he does an incredible job as Raphael. He has that sort of evil presence that you need. I think he does a not so good job as Rian. He's not nearly as good at pulling off the goody two shoes character.
Yeah.
But I think in both ones he actually outperforms Lawrence Fishburne, who Lawrence Fishburne is a legendary actor. And it feels like he's kind of sleepwalking through this movie. Like he showed up on set and was like, okay, what are my lines? Okay, I'll just say them in as flat a voice as I can.
Well, yeah. I really love, even though I hate Raphael as a character, especially in the next books, I loved the performance. I was like, yes, that was an amazing casting choice, because he just he also does a really good job at the pretending to be nice and not making it obvious that he's pretending to be nice. Because you almost want to, when he's talking to Sophie about, I'll give you power, and nobody wants to listen to you, you almost want to believe him. And you're like, no, wait, he's a bad guy. I shouldn't believe him. But he just, has such a charming way about him when he's trying to do that he draws you in, and you're just like, wait, I'm not supposed to be liking you. I'm not supposed to be listening to you because you're the evil one. Yeah.
And I think, to be fair to Lawrence Fishburne, he has the more difficult role where he's delivering a lot of exposition. So, he's a talented actor who was probably showing up here mainly for the paycheck. So that he's fine. He serves his role. But I think Kit Young, in playing the same character, really outshone him in a way that I was a bit surprised by. I don't like how they used Raphael in this movie, but I think Kit Young's performance is really spectacular.
Yeah. I wish they would have changed, who was it, Lawrence, I think, to play Professor Sater, and then had Professor Sater, because he very much, I think, when I saw him in the trailer, he very much, that would be how Professor Sater would act, very just kind of monotone, not really talking much, very calm, and I think he would have fit way better if they would have had the Professor Sater character. I think he would have done a way, way better job at that than the schoolmaster. So, that's just my personal opinion.
We also have Cate Blanchett plays the Storian, the voice of the Storian, who's also the narrator. And, I mean, she's kind of the person you get to narrate this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I don't know if there's anything to really say about her performance beyond that. And yeah, then we have a lot of sort of bit players. We have Peter Serafinowicz, who plays the gnome teacher in absolutely ridiculous hair and makeup. He's unrecognizable. I don't know that his performance is incredible. He didn't really stand out to me besides the hair.
Well, the gnome character nobody likes him.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he kind of pulls that off. I like the gnome humor, though. That was that was very well executed over there.
Yep.
So.
We also have Patti LuPone, who's incredibly iconic Broadway actress, who is in a single scene. She's Mrs. Deauville, the Galveston bookshop owner. Again, another just like, she's this legendary actress, and they brought her in for a single scene where she doesn't really do much besides exposition.
Yeah, I was kind of sad that in the book, the bookshop is such this huge thing, and they talk about how all the kids, they talk about how when a new book comes out, all the kids line up for blocks to get their book, and they see all the kids reading, and it's this huge thing. And I'm kind of sad that they got rid of that in the movie, where you don't get to see these kids. Basically, all the kids are dreaming of wanting to go to the school for good. It's not only Sophie, it's all the kids. And they kind of take that away from the movie, and I just think it's kind of sad that they take that away from the movie. So,
and it is kind of odd, because you have Patti LuPone, who's this incredibly iconic, not only actor, but singer. And then you also have both of the protagonists are played by women who are well known for musicals. So Sophia Wiley, who plays Agatha, I believe she was on High School Musical, the series. And then Sophia Ann Caruso played, I forget the character's name, but from Beetlejuice, the musical. And then you also have Patti LuPone here. You have Rachel Bloom, who I believe does singing as well. So I was honestly kind of surprised that this wasn't a musical, given they have these actors who are known for doing music.
Yeah, one of the things I was really disappointed in is they have a poem at the beginning of the book about them. The Twin Towers, one for good, one for evil. The only way out is through a fairy tale. I really, really wanted them to add that in somewhere and have a singing version, or have Sophie say it, because it is in the book. Sophie loves singing it because she's like, I'm going to go to one of those towers and I'm going to come out in a fairy tale. And I was just really hoping for, even if it's not Sophie singing it, if, it shows up somewhere, and it didn't come out, and I was just kind of disappointed in that, so.
Yeah, and the reason I bring up musicals specifically is that the author of the book, Soman Chainani, has said in interviews that part of what inspired him to write the book was he watched the Disney fairy tale movies growing up, so Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, I assume also Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast. And then when he got older, he read the fairy tales they were based on and was like, oh, these actual fairy tales are more darker and more complex than the Disney movies. So I think having this movie be a musical might have brought in some of that sort of Disney fairy tale aspect to the beginning, where it's all very sanitized and very, good is on one side, evil is on the other. It's clearly defined. And then as it goes on, you can kind of have that mixing and a bit more questioning coming in.
I was kind of hoping that they'd do something kind of like The Wizard of Oz, where it's black and white at the beginning, and then a dramatic change in, because there isn't really the dramatic change between Gavaldon and the schools, where I feel like there should have been. I don't know how they would have done that, but, different lighting, different something to really show that Gavaldon is such a different world than the schools. Because it is in the books, they do show that, like, not very many people know how to get to Gavaldon, only basically the schoolmaster knows how to get there, and how they even talk about in the books where people, they try to leave Gavaldon and they'll walk in a straight line, and then they end up on the other side of town, and nobody has ever left. And so I think they should have shown something like that, where like, oh, Gavaldon is this shut-off little place that's so different.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, again, something that was very clearly set up in the book that's just kind of dropped in the movie. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Other performances that stood out, I didn't really have anyone else. The supporting characters have so little to do that none of the actors have much to dig into. Yeah,
I really liked Lady Lesso's performance.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, we forgot to mention Lady Lesso. Charlize Theron, who's iconic. She is well known for a bunch of things. I always think of her performance in Mad Max Fury Road. But she's also been in just a ton of very well-known performances throughout the years.
Yeah, I mean, when I first saw the trailer, I was kind of disappointed, because I was like, Lady Lesso, I kind of imagined her almost like looking like Agatha would have looked, very pale vampire witch, and she does not look like that in the movie. But then just the performance, I was like, I don't care anymore how she looks. I care that and so I really think, and they did that with some of the other characters where they took away the book description and they changed it a bit. Yeah. But with Lady Lesso, it works out so well, because she still looks like a witch, kind of. You still get that, oh yeah, she's evil.
Yeah. So, and you can tell that Charlize Theron is having a lot of fun with the character. Uh-huh. She signed on, I think, initially having read the script and being like, oh, this is an opportunity to really let go and have a fun time being this sort of fairy tale villain that's very stereotypical, but then also maybe a little bit more complex, because the story is a little bit more complex than...
Yeah, I really liked how the camera would be on her and she would just take over. Every scene she's in, it's like she's just there. And you can't really say that, except for Sophie. No other characters really do that.
Yeah, I think part of that is just that they're both allowed to let go and have fun. Mm-hmm. Whereas, Kerry Washington has to be the sort of good and prim and proper, and Sophia Wiley has to be more introverted and reserved and awkward even.
I really liked the scene, the finger glow unlocking scene, when Sophie walks in, and just that exchange of looks between them. It worked so well with both characters. Just like, it just was an amazing scene. So
yeah, and that scene had some good visuals. So I actually want to pop over to the visuals. A lot of the sets and the costumes, as we said, worked well. I think the CGI is just not up to par. Yeah. It's very noticeable. It just doesn't look as crisp as the sets and the costumes do. There's some of the CGI works better than others of the CGI, but like when the bird is carrying them to the castle, you can tell that it's the two actresses who are wearing harnesses in front of a green screen, and then the bird is entirely CGI, and then the background is, footage of New Zealand or something. And I made the comparison to the Harry Potter movies before. It looks like an effect that would be in the first Harry Potter movie. Yeah.
The scenes where they're introducing the school when they're flying in, it could have been way more impressive, because I love how they first show the school for good, and then pan over to the School for Evil and all the fog.
Yeah.
But they could have done it way better, I think, because really the School for Good and Evil didn't look that impressive. It just looked like, oh, you take a Disney castle and then a spooky Halloween castle.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't really...
Yeah, you don't get the same aspect of wonder to the world as you maybe want. Even things like the blue forest isn't blue.
Yeah. I really wish what they would have done, too, while they were flying over the schools is shown some of the endless woods. Because they talk a lot about the endless woods and how they've flown over it and just how dark and scary it looks compared to the school and how it just is dark woods. So I feel like they could have done something with the endless woods, like they're flying over these endless woods and then they come up to the schools.
Yeah.
And the contrast, so.
It is definitely, like, I think a lot of it has to do with budget. Mm-hmm. And it's unfortunate because, I mean, Netflix could probably afford to do this with a slightly higher budget, but I don't know that they have the faith in the property that they would do that. I'm actually surprised this is a movie and not a TV series, because it feels I could see a way that, and we've talked how they've condensed a lot of these things in a way that sort of you get rid of a lot of important scenes and characters and world building. And usually I'm the type of person where I'm like, no, series, I don't really want to watch a series that's a lot of time, and a lot of series are just very poorly paced. But here's one where I think having 4 to 6 hours instead of 2 hours would have helped a lot in just giving everything space to breathe. But that would have stretched their budget even more, so I can see why they went with just one movie. Yeah, and last thing I wanted to talk about was the music, which is, I don't know, it's forgettable.
Yeah, and it doesn't, there's like points where like you notice the music a lot, and then there's points where you don't notice it, and it's just like, I don't know, it's very strange, and the music doesn't really fit. I noticed especially in the last battle scene, the music doesn't fit what's going on.
Yeah.
Like I feel like they could have worked better. They could have worked to make the scenes kind of make it more like a music video instead of because I know there have been movies and shows that have worked their fight scenes and tried to make them look more like a music video, and it's worked so well. And I was kind of hoping the School for Good and Evil would do that, but it doesn't work. If you're going to put music over the fight, it needs to fit. So.
Yeah, I think the use of popular music was maybe a bit too much. Mm-hmm. And that's definitely where you can tell, like, Paul Feig is a comedy director, and most of the movies he's done have been set in the modern day, so he's using a lot of modern music to set the stage, where here I think it kind of just feels out of place. And I was thinking, again, bringing up Harry Potter one last time, one of the greatest things about the Harry Potter movies and why they are so iconic is the music. Mm-hmm. Everyone remembers the music, and the music is what transports you into the world. Even if you don't notice it, in your subconscious, that's what is giving you this sort of this wondrous feeling and stirring your emotions. Whereas in this movie, you never have those moments where the music is stirring your emotions.
Yeah. I really liked, though, when Sophie walks in, though, that music they picked for that.
Yeah.
That was huge.
I think certain scenes they choose, but again, I kind of wish they had gone with... had better music throughout the movie. Mm-hmm. And had more original score elements than... like... using one or two pop songs, and they're very much going for a very specific aesthetic. It's almost like the Bridgerton thing of bringing in these modern music pieces in this modern dialogue style, which makes sense because this is a fairy tale that is sort of modernizing and questioning these tropes of the fairy tale genre.
Yeah. I think the music will date it, though.
Yeah.
Like, in a few years, because one of the things with the Harry Potter movies is even though they were made a while ago, you watch them and they still feel like they were made around this time, because they're very timeless.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like the School for Good and Evil, some of the scenes are like, oh, that's gonna get dated.
Yeah. It's definitely of its time. Mm-hmm. In a way that even the book, I think the book will translate. There's a reason, it's been almost 10 years since the book came out, and the movie's finally coming out, and it is still relevant because the themes it's hitting on are very sort of important, and this thing of, maybe the dichotomy of good versus evil, maybe there's more complexity there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's unfortunate that the soundtrack is really gonna hold this back.
Yeah, when I first read the book, I almost kind of wanted it to be kind of more of an animated movie.
Yeah, I think that would have worked really well.
I even like if it would have been animated kind of like Arcane, right? With the CGI animate, not CGI, kind of CGI animation. It is. The 3D. The stylized 3D animation, or even just I wasn't thinking Disney style, because that's too soft. I was thinking, sharp lines, and I was really imagining it to be this animated movie. So, yeah.
I would agree that I think this would have worked well as an animated movie. And even then, you can do so much in animation that in live action is more difficult to pull off. Mm-hmm. In terms of you can design things a bit better and design a more cohesive thing where in a live action movie, the live action elements and the CGI elements are going to clash. Whereas mm-hmm. in an animated movie, that's not necessarily going to happen.
I thought it was overall pretty good. I mean, it's not the best adaptation, but I think in terms of adaptations, it's actually pretty good. I've seen way worse book adaptations, so... Okay.
Yeah, I didn't think it stood up, and I think, unfortunately, a lot of the reviews I've been reading have been, pointing out these flaws with the movie that aren't issues in the book. And mm-hmm. It's kind of sad that for a lot of people, this will be their experience of the School for Good and Evil will be this movie and not the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I hope they can bring it back with the sequels and make better adaptations with the sequels.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what they do if they continue. I mean, this will have to be big enough for Netflix that they feel the need to continue. I wouldn't be surprised if this is just a one-off for them. And it ends, both the book and the movie end in a way where it could be a one-off thing. The book actually ends...
right after the kiss.
Yeah, right after the kiss, but it's almost more definitive. Mm-hmm. In the movie, they have this sequel hook of, this letter comes through a portal. Mm-hmm. And in the book, it just ends as soon as all of the relevant plot elements have been brought to a close. Mm-hmm. I would be curious to see what they would do with a sequel. I actually have to read the sequel books now. I enjoyed the book enough that...
Another thing I didn't like about the ending was all 3 books end the endings all mirror each other in a certain way.
Okay.
And the way they ended the movie doesn't bring that mirroring effect into it.
Okay. So that might be another issue mm-hmm. for down the road.
Because all the endings kind of seem like, oh, I think I already read this ending. It kind of feels a bit like that. But when they added all the things after the kiss, it's like, oh, well, now you got rid of that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, overall, I gave the movie a 2 out of 5. I think it's an adaptation that takes a lot away from what made the original good.
Mm-hmm. I'd probably have to agree with the 2 out of 5.
Yeah. It's not the worst thing out there, but I left a little bit disappointed in it.
Yeah. I wasn't expecting much in the first place, but...
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us for this special Halloween episode. It's maybe dubiously related to Halloween, but there were pumpkins in the movie.
Oh, that Reaper scene where the pumpkin comes to life, that was very Halloween-y.
Yeah. And it's coming out in Halloween season, so... But yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and you can follow us on social media. We are Binging Barbie Podcast on Instagram, at Binging Barbie on Twitter, and Binging Barbie, a Barbie movie podcast on Letterboxd. And yeah, this episode is kind of just a bonus, so you'll need to check out our other episodes where we usually talk about Barbie movies with my co-host John. Sarah's been stepping in for co-host this episode.
Woohoo.
As the resident School for Good and Evil expert. But yeah, join us all on Thursday morning for a new Barbie movie.